Welcome and thank you for listening to the Civic Space today with Southern Defenders, a program that explores the status of the civic and political space in the Southern Africa region. We unpack critical issues that shape the space. My name is Mandati Mlojwa and I'm your host for today's conversation. Today's episode deep dives into the life of Tanele Maseko, a human rights defender from eSwatini, the last absolute monarchy in Africa. She is the widow of Thulani Maseko, a widely celebrated activist who was murdered in his home on 21 January 2023 by suspected state agents. Tanele has bravely persevered, traveling the world to call for justice and accountability. Recently, she was named the vice chairperson of the Southern African Human Rights Defenders Network. Her story and journey is one of resilience and mirrors the inspiring commitment and passion that drives human rights defenders, who, even when the challenges seem insurmountable, continue to fight for what they believe in, like a flame that refuses to be extinguished. We hope to learn about her work, some of the challenges she has faced, the ways she has pivoted around those challenges, and ultimately, what she hopes other HRDs can do to continue the work they do in their communities and the region. Tanele, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mantate, and thank you to everyone that is joining us today. It is such an honor to have this opportunity to explore the said kingdom of eSwatini, but also to cripple into the human rights issues in the kingdom of eSwatini. Thank you so much, Mantate.
It's a pleasure. So I have introduced you just a little bit, but I always love to start the conversation by having the guests actually share what they believe themselves to be. So who is Tanele Maseko?
Tanele Maseko is a mother. Tanele Maseko is a widow. Tanele Maseko is a woman human rights defender who believes in justice for all and who believes in a free democracy. So that is Tanele Maseko in a nutshell.
I actually love this response because a greater part of today's conversation just centers on the fact that human rights defenders are not just individuals. They are people with multiple layers. And I love the fact that you highlighted some of the roles that you play or some of the things that define you. So I want to start by asking you to highlight some of the human rights work that you've been involved in the past or are currently involved in, and some of the impact that you've seen of this work.
Now, after the killing, or even before the killing of my husband, Thulani Maseko, we have been involved through the multi-stakeholder forum, which Thulani was the chairperson of. But myself, I've been working in the community around women issues, around the land question. We have done a lot of civic education, educating the community, the different communities in the country, what it means to have a basic right, what it means to have land, what it means to speak openly and freely about your rights. This has been but one exercise. The second exercise that we have conducted, also through the help of Southern Defenders, is to go around to the region in different countries, advocating for different human rights activists. We've been in Zimbabwe to observe Job Sikala's trial. We have been in Zambia, we have been in South Africa to observe issues of Bahlali Basemjondolo. So we have done a lot of advocacy also in terms of seeking justice for the June 2021 massacre victims in the Kingdom of Swaziland. So we have done a number of activities around human rights and human rights violations in the region. So that is the work that we do. But of course, what I am doing now is seeking justice for Thulani Maseko, seeking accountability for his death and that of the victims of the 2021 massacre.
Thank you so much for that. And what are some of the challenges that you faced in all of this work that you're doing?
There are a number of challenges, Mantate, that we face. Particularly, I'd want to talk about the challenges that I face in Swaziland. You find that you visit a community. In this community, of course, in Swaziland, human rights defenders and political activists are labeled as terrorists. Now, when you visit this community, of course, they will say, we will introduce ourselves as human rights defenders here to educate about rights, basic rights, the right to water, the right to education. But what we then face is that then you have to approach the traditional authorities, that is first. I am a woman, now I am a widow, and I'm in my mourning gowns. Now the resistance is that we can't have a widow moving up and down. As a widow, you are supposed to be at home and not moving up and down. That is one. But secondly, we meet security agencies who then want to be part of those civic educating meetings. And if you have security agencies, not especially in my country, then people are intimidated. People can't speak freely. There is that fear that once I speak out, I'll be then seen as a terrorist. I'll be labeled as a voice of dissent, and then I'll be taken in for questioning. And then, of course, there's this lingering jail term that then the system then uses. So the challenges are quite huge. The security aspect as well, because then you are being followed by the security agencies. They ask around, why you are here, what are you talking about? So the security aspect of it is quite huge when we go around trying to do our work as human rights activists and trying to, alert people and educate people on their basic rights. So the security aspect of it is quite high. So thank you, Mantate.
With the challenges in mind, what are some of the things that you've had to do to pivot around these challenges? It could be things that you've done in eSwatini, but also things that maybe have worked in other countries in the region that have similar challenges. What has been done to try and counter this resistance?
So, Mantate, I want to allude to the fact that the church then plays a very critical role in assisting us as human rights defenders, because one strategy that has worked for me is I will go into this church and talk to the church leaders to say, I am a human rights defender. I am here to educate people on their rights. So I'd ask to use maybe their venue. And the church in my country, Swaziland, is a very neutral place. So anyone who comes into a church is welcome. So that strategy for me has worked. That's part one. Secondly, it has another strategy that has helped is that when you use women issues of reproductive health, issues of education, issues of the health issue, you are able then to get different players come into those meetings. And then while speaking of those reproductive rights, you also then bring in the human rights aspect, you bring in the political question. So it makes it easy then to maneuver in such environments. But the church and the women issues is one strategy that I've used to be able then to go into these communities and come in as this person who's just visiting the church. And then, of course, you're able to then get different members of the community speaking out openly and freely, because security agents then cannot come into the church because they observe a church as one place where people go there to worship. So I've been using churches and I've been using community centers as one place where I'm able to hold these civic education exercises without any interference.
I wanted to also just tap into the example that you gave earlier when we started the conversation, where you say that you've had the privilege to be a part of regional solidarity missions in countries like Zimbabwe. I wanted to ask if what kind of challenges did you face in those particular instances, and what are some of the ways in which you maneuvered that space?
Thank you, Mantate. In Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe is a very scary place to go into. It's like you're going into the lion's den. One challenge that I faced when I got into Zimbabwe was the questioning when you're going through immigration. They scan your passport and they question why you are here, what organization you have come for. So you have to try and maneuver the immigration officers. But whilst on the ground, moving up and down, you've got to be alert to the fact that the people that you work with, you come in harshly. No one is aware that you are in the country. So, of course, in Zimbabwe, the security aspect also cripples in, because you never know when then you'll be seen as a threat and when you will be deported. But what I've tried to do whilst in Zimbabwe is that I work with different organizations that organize accordingly. So once I'm in the country, I'm able to deliver whatever statement I'm there or observe whatever I'm there to observe, and then quickly move out of the country. So it's quite tricky. It's very tricky in Zimbabwe. It's a very tricky country to work under. So I try different strategies, working with different stakeholders and players in different organizations. And of course, you always have a lawyer with you so that just in case something comes up, you are able to have cover and someone knows that something has happened. So Zimbabwe is quite tricky. So when I'm there, I try to have and talk to different stakeholders so that in terms of security, one is able to be assisted.
I actually love the fact that you handpicked one country and just highlighted the issue of context, which would then indicate that it's very important in any other context in a different country to understand the dynamics within that space, as we continue to do the HRD work that we do. So many people have expressed how the way that you've carried forward the legacy of Thulani's work and contribution to the human rights space is commendable. I have 1,000 questions to expand on that, but I'll try and keep them to a minimum. So maybe let's start with you sharing what the experience has done to your work. What influence did the passing of your husband have on the way that you approach your work today?
Thank you, Mantate. One will have to understand that for a very long time, Thulani, as a human rights activist, has dealt with a number of issues. But I think what really helped me to be able to stand up now was the fact that when Thulani was incarcerated, I was the voice. When I would speak to him and ask him, how do you feel when people talk about you when you're in prison? He said, prison is very lonely. So when you speak out about my situation in prison, you are actually educating people, one, about human rights violation, the right to freedom of expression, that my right of freedom of expression was infringed. And hence, you then bring people into the picture of Swaziland, that whilst the Constitution of 2005 guarantees freedom of expression in theory, but practically that is not true in the question of Swaziland. So when he was in prison, then I was able to speak out to say, lawyers, human rights lawyers in Swaziland, if they speak out and seek accountability, they are subjected to prison sentences. Journalists are exposed to so many of human rights violations and intimidation. So Thulani's incarceration helped me to realize that the human rights violation happening in this country are so dire, so much such that people then decide, if I speak out, people live in fear. So my speaking out helps people then to be able to then raise their voice. And it also helps different political activists, human rights defenders, to realize that when you speak out, there are people listening to you. You then have international community coming in to seek accountability on our behalf. You have different civil society organizations then coming in to say, what is happening in the country? How can we assist you as human rights defenders? It then amplifies the voice, which then helps in keeping the government in check and in knowing that whatever happens, you have people supporting and listening to you. So I draw the strength from knowing that someone somewhere is listening and someone somewhere will come and assist. It may be someone far away, but my voicing out these violations, my pointing out that there is something not right happening in certain countries, then helps the citizens of that country to know that they're not alone and to know that someone somewhere is watching. So in a nutshell, the advocacy and speaking out really helps in amplifying the voice of a human rights defender and helping that particular issue is then taken up critically in different forums in the world. So the advocacy really does help, Mantate. I'd want to end there for now. Thank you.
This is powerful. If this was the ending of the conversation, I would not want to say something else. But I think the statement that really stuck for me was how you say that in his incarceration, you were his voice. And I think that's just the premise of today's conversation and why we find so much inspiration in your journey, because you're reminding us of the power of continuity, the ability to carry forward the work of human rights defenders that we've lost, human rights defenders that are not capacitated to speak for themselves right now. So I think that was very powerful. And still on the conversation about continuity, what kind of support have you received? Or I think let's start with what kind of support have you received that you feel was very empowering for you as you transitioned from the events in January up to now? And also, what kind of other support do you think can be made available, should be made available, that could be empowering for HRDs who are in your shoes or that find themselves in your shoes in the future?
Thank you so much, Mantate, for that question. What has really helped me in amplifying Thulani's voice is Southern Defenders. Southern Defenders then gave one a platform. When I'm talking of a platform where you are able to travel regionally and speak about these issues. So this platform then is able to give a voice to the voiceless. For instance, after Thulani's killing, what the government had thought they were going to achieve was silencing me and silencing different human rights defenders. But what then Southern Defenders did was it helped me to go out into the world and state the case of Thulani openly and honestly. These platforms then help us to be the voice of the voiceless. That is part one. But secondly, it has also helped other widows to say, as I speak of my issue, of Thulani's issue, then there are other widows who then approach me to say, I also lost my child. I also lost my husband. How can we assist each other? We then have this small unit now as widows where we sit once a week. We encourage each other to say, how can we find our feet? That is one. But secondly, what then I see as a problem or as a challenge is the lack of funding. Because as we go about as human rights defenders, you know, there's travel issues, there's security issues. So we do not have the financial capacity to do all that work. So for myself, for instance, Southern Defenders has been my wings to fly. So when I have a certain project, they will come up to say, this is how we can assist, this is how we can assist. But there have also been other organizations, your Amnesty International, your Open Society, who help in helping us maneuver with the advocacy activities, who help us in terms of our travel. So it is a lot, Mantate, but the one need that human rights defenders are actually yearning for is the need for security, because as we go about this work, you would understand that we're touching on the powerful. So these people then will want to silence us by putting us into jail, by intimidating us, having security agencies following us, and of course, by killing us. Thulani's assassination is a clear example that the powerful people governing different countries then use assassins to silence human rights defenders. So human rights defenders do need security in their homes because they are human beings, they have families, they do need security, of course, security education, you know, capacitating these human rights defenders to know if you're handling a certain case, this is how you go about it. So there's a lot of need in terms of security capacitation, and of course the financial aid that we also need in going about, because we travel, there's fuel costs. So there are a number of issues then that we meet as human rights defenders. So the need for financial assistance is there, and the security aspect is quite huge. So I'd want to end there, Mandata. Thank you.
Thank you for those practical examples of the support both that you received and the one that you feel is still very needed. And one of the things I loved was just the example you gave of how just your experience and you choosing to speak truth to power, regardless of what you're going through and the challenges you still face, brought together women that are going through something similar, have gone through something similar, just reminding us that, when we create spaces where people can relate, we are creating spaces of empowerment where people that would ordinarily take a step back because they don't feel that their voice is loud enough. When we come together, we amplify those voices. So it's really just empowering to see that. And I'm hoping that as we continue to grow, even in the work that we're doing in the region, we will be able to see how some of these smaller informal groups in the different regions actually can begin to influence each other across the regions as well. And I wanted to also say that the story of Thulani takes us all to the reality that HRDs like you are human first, like I said at the beginning, that you're surrounded by actual people to whom you play different roles. You already mentioned that you're a mother, you're a wife, you're a widow, you're a sister, a daughter, a friend, you're a community member, you're all of those things. So my question is, these are aspects of one person. How can HRD work actually appeal or show up for these different elements? Like, how can HRD support that is given be given with that reality in mind, that we're giving it to a mother who has children, we're giving it to a mother that we are encouraging to keep doing what they're doing, but they have children that feel threatened or feel a certain type of way because of the work that their mother is doing. The threats that you experience, it's affecting the community that you're in the church, it also affects the dynamics there. So how can the support that is given interact with the different aspects of you as an HRD?
Thank you so much for that question. As a mother, one faces a lot of questions. Now, as a mother, and now I'm left as a widow, I'm supposed to take care of my children in terms of the very practical aspect of it. My children need school fees. There's the upkeep of the home. So that is part one. So as human rights defenders, we tend to overlook that and hope that, as we go about our work, someone will want to assist, and then we do not concentrate fully. I think it is also because of the passion that then one has to help assist the poor of the poorest, to help people realize that you have a right to life, you have a right to education. So we tend now to then overlook our mandate as mothers, our role as females. I would want to put it like that. So your question then says to me, how do I then strike a balance as a mother and as a human rights defender? So the assistance then comes in many folds, because as I go with my work, I raise this voice, but back home, at the back of my mind, I am struggling. As I'm doing this work, who is taking care of my kids? How am I going to pay for their school fees? How am I going to keep up with their needs in terms of their health, in terms of the food, in terms of me as a mother being there with them physically? That issue is one thing. But how I strike a balance is that as I do this work, I have small little time where I then sit down with my children to say, I am your mother. I am involved in this work, but this work is to help other people know their rights. As I am doing this work, I am supporting you. I try and encourage them to know that in as much as I'm doing this work, I am alive to the fact that they have needs. And I am alive to the fact that I am working so hard, so much that they are able to go to school. I am working so hard, so much that they are comfortable at home. I am working so hard, so much that they have a proper life. So I try and sit down with my kids and educate them why I'm doing this work and encourage them also to know who they are and to understand the kind of environment that they live under. Hence, I have to do the work that I'm doing. So from time to time, as a mother and as a human rights defender, you have to just sit down your kids, explain to them the kind of work that you do. And of course, explain the dangers, yes, but encourage them that you, as a mother, you are fighting for a better society. So that is why you have taken up this role to be a human rights defender. So it takes a lot, yes, but the continued encouragement and the continued educating your relatives, your friends, to say, in as much as I'm doing this work, it is not about me, but it is about creating better societies for all. Because the work of human rights defenders is never about to glorify oneself, but it is about the work and the situations that certain people in the region find themselves in, and one wants to then assist. So how best can one assist? Is to amplify the voice, be there with those different people in those different countries, and try and find mechanisms and strategies to best assist the people of the region. So in a nutshell, I'd want to say that's how I would want to answer your question, Matate. Thank you.
You know, I kept thinking when you're speaking that the children are lucky to have you. And it's even inspiring for us. We're not necessarily your biological children, because these are the children that will continue to take up responsibility in our communities. And you're already instilling that sense of citizen responsibility and just teaching them by being the commitment and the power of advocating for social justice. So I love that. I'm inspired by that. And I hope that, you know, it goes out as a shout out as well to all of the women in the region, all of the women in the continent that are doing the same thing that you're doing, that are reminding their children that beyond yourselves and the family that you come from, you have a sense of responsibility to the community. I was going to ask you my next question, which is really centered on young women like me that look at you and say, we are inspired by you, we love your journey. I think it's very easy for us who are outside to just look at you and say, we love your strength, we love to see what you're doing. But I think there's just so much that, you know, you walked through to be the person that you are, and you've shared a part of that today. But what message would you give to younger women like me who look at you and feel inspired by your journey?
I think, Mantate, thank you so much for that question. I think as women, very much we are not considered as a force. But what I would want to encourage young women is that young women are the future generation. Young women, you have to take up your space in your communities, in your workspace. We need to be empowered. That is part one as women. But young women need to take up the space, take up the leadership positions, empower yourselves through education, because I think women need to be empowered through education so that they're able to then gain the confidence to be able to take up these leadership roles. Because women, we tend to say, my space is at home, you know, I have to take care of the children. But what I am seeing and what I'm discovering is that we need to encourage each other on a daily basis. We have the likes of your Michelle Obamas. We have your likes of your Thulani Maseko. We look up, you must have a mentor as a young woman to say, here is Thulani Maseko. If she was able to hold and use her office powerfully and correctly to hold the powerful to account, then in every space as a woman that you occupy, you are able to hold that space up and use it in a good way that everyone then in the country, in our communities benefit. So as women in our positions of influence, in our positions of power, let's use them correctly. Let's empower other young women. And as women, let's hold each other's hands and let's work together so that we have a better and more prosperous and more transparent and open society. So women are a force. And as we as women, if we stand with each other and encourage each other, we'll then be able to have a powerful and more open and honest society. So that is how I would want to frame it, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I don't think that I still need to ask you any parting words, because one of the things I really wanted for this episode to be is to just focus on reminding women that they're strong, that they're powerful, that they have so much power to make a difference. And you're an example of women that are doing that. So thank you so much for giving us your time and all of that you shared today, and just continuing to speak truth to power. Like I said already, that I'm inspired by you. I know a whole lot of people that are inspired by you. And there's so many people that will be listening to this episode that are inspired by you. So when we see you honoring the challenges that you're facing, you're honoring the journey that you're on, we're really inspired, because we're seeing that it's not all rosy, but we're still encouraged to keep on fighting. So thank you so much, Tanele, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mantate. Thank you so much for Southern Defenders for availing this space. And thank you so much to everyone and anyone who continues to listen, who continues to support human rights defenders in the Southern region and human rights defenders in the whole of Africa. Africa is a ticking time bomb. So I'd encourage human rights defenders for us to stand together, support one another. An injury to one is an injury to all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And a special thank you to our listeners. We'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts on today's episode. Leave us a comment on the platform you're using to listen to this episode, or tag us on a post on social media. Remember to share this podcast and follow Southern Defenders on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can visit our website, www.southerndefenders.africa, to get a broader sense of the work of Southern Defenders. This is the Civic Space Today, a program of the Southern Defenders. I am Mandatim Loja, your host for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time. Together we defend.